All right, everybody, welcome to another SaaS Founder Show. This is Tony Zayas here, joined by Andy Helko. Andy's our founder. How you doing, Andy?
Good. You're not going to say the one and only
The one,
Andy Helko?
the very one and only.
That's right.
Yeah, so how are things going?
Things are fantastic, absolutely awesome. Can't complain, even with the weather, enjoying getting ready for the holidays. How about you?
Yeah, same here. I don't mind the weather. I'm kind of a winter guy, so I'm okay with that. But yeah, getting ready for the holidays and trying to just
I know we have another awesome, fantastic guest today. Who do we got and what are we talking about?
Yeah, so this is an exciting one. We have Zach Fishroth. He's the co-founder and CEO of CoHealth. And so we're going to talk about CoHealth, but also he's got some exciting news. This is kind of a transitional time, so let's bring Zach on and take that off the screen. Hey, Zach, welcome. How you doing?
Hey, guys. I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, very good, very good. Thank you for being here. This is very exciting. And we're catching you, we chatted just before we went live here real quickly, but really exciting time. There was a big announcement just in the last couple of weeks, some transition. So, when we got you all set up to come on the show, you are the co-founder of CoHealth app and CEO there, and CoHealth was acquired, correct?
That's right. Yeah, we made the announcement 2 or 3 weeks ago now.
Wow, congrats. That's super exciting.
Yeah, congrats.
Thank you very much.
That's part of the story that I think folks that tune in and kind of watch our show are always interested in is, what's that transition? And, it'll be interesting to hear the backstory, that process, and now where you're going after.
Sure. Yeah, so I'll try to not be too health specific because there's just a boom in digital health happening right now, given the world that we're living in. But I think what a lot of people have realized in recent months, brought on by what's happening in the world, is that we can do healthcare very differently. And what we were basically building at CoHealth was a platform to help healthcare organizations share trusted health content with their audiences. So imagine like your local hospital or doctor's office basically had their own version of WebMD with a bunch of tools alongside that content to help drive better experiences and outcomes for their patients. So we scaled that platform to about 200 different health organizations across North America, had 50,000 patients that were using the platform. And we recently exited to Acto, which is another Toronto-based company that has a big footprint in the life science and life science space. And it was a very interesting process, but long and the short of it is, life science companies are a really big part of the value chain in terms of delivering value for patients, in terms of knowledge surrounding med devices and drugs that they need to support their health. And we felt that there was really good alignment there for that being a new home for CoHealth.
Yeah, that's really exciting. I mean, I think it's always a, big deal when you have a moment like that, but maybe you can take us back in time to kind of the origin story of where you started and how you started CoHealth and why, and just, what did all that look like?
Yeah, so I actually started CoHealth. I have no background in the healthcare sector, which might be a little bit odd for a healthcare founder or previous healthcare founder. A lot of founders in the health space have, doctors or MDs, or they, have some kind of background in the sector. I was a patient, so back like almost 10 years ago now, more than 10 years ago, I was a student at the University of Waterloo in Waterloo, Canada. And I was playing my first ever game of Ultimate Frisbee. I was wearing basketball shoes. It rained the night before in the field I was playing on, so it was wet, and I was wearing improper footwear. And I broke my leg. First game of Ultimate ever, which is a non-contact sport. Broke my leg and had to undergo surgery, developed a complication post-op, and that progressed to the point my leg was nearly amputated. So really unfortunate experience, and it was avoidable. And just drawing back to that, if I had the knowledge and the understanding of what to look for, it wouldn't have gone as bad as it did. So I wanted to build something that could have, helped people like me in a similar circumstance. And that's kind of the origin story behind CoHealth.
And you did that with a co-founder. How did you meet him, and how did you go through that process?
Yeah, so my co-founder, his name's Corey Blumenfeld. He's a good friend. I knew him before we actually started the company together. We were in the same college town at the same time, and we were in a similar friend group, but weren't friends ourselves. Mm-hmm. But I actually reconnected with Corey because I matched with his sister on Tinder at the time. And one day showed up at his sister's place, and he was there, and he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "What are you doing here?" Reconnected and decided to start a company together.
That's fantastic. Tell me about the co-founder experience. I think over the years, as I've talked to different folks that have started businesses, whether alone, there are challenges that can sometimes come from having a co-founder. Mm-hmm. But tell me about your experience. What was it like starting together, going through, some of the processes, including the ups and downs. Talk about your experience having a co-founder. Yeah,
I mean, it's a wild roller coaster of emotion, having a co-founder, because you love them. They're your friends. Spend more time with them than your family. Like, you are basically married to this person for the duration of your company, right? And that could be, in the case of an acquisition or failure, that could be a couple of years, or it could be 20, right? And I think that having a very clear set of rules or guidelines, just understanding each other, right? What makes the other person tick? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are the things that really get you going? And how do you resolve disputes in a calm and collected way? I think are just transparent conversations to have between founders at the very early stages. Because just like getting married, right? You want to know what you're getting into. You want to have all the important conversations before things get really important, like before you buy a house. And I think that kind of decision making is really important in the founder relationship story too.
Now, did you sign a prenup and go through the whole legal process early and before you guys jumped in together?
So because of our existing relationship, I think there was a little bit of trust there. So we didn't sign a prenup or anything like that, but we did have a lot of those conversations up front, right? Just better understanding each other. And I think that over the lifespan of the company, we both grew a lot as well. And our strengths and weaknesses changed and evolved over time. So I think just being able to have open and honest conversations with each other about, what's working, what's not working is just really important.
And did you think that ended up being okay and working out, that you guys didn't create a legal structure around the partnership?
Oh, so we did create just to be clear, we did create a legal structure around the partnership. Like, we incorporated the company, which is what most founders do. But we didn't formalize our, personal relationship or anything like that. Like, we didn't have a charter, as I know some founders do, or like a guiding document. We just always promised to be open and honest with each other and talk to one another when there were hard decisions to make.
Yeah, I originally had a partner, actually, when I started my business, and I think after years, I ended up buying him out a number of years later. And I think when I went through that experience of buying him out, I wish we had, more detailed documentation and other information, going into that process. So I kind of learned the lesson of, he was a friend of mine from college, the handshake, and, this is what we're going to do. A couple years down the line can change. And so I'm always kind of interested in other people's experiences with, partners, and both the relationship and the legal side and some of those pieces.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm very fortunate. The new company that I've recently joined the leadership team on, which you guys wanted to talk about, is I'm joining with a couple of very close, longtime friends of mine. Known these people for a decade. And one of the things that law school taught me was, even if you're going into business with your best friend or family, trust but verify, and have all the documentation set up from a very early stage, just to make sure that everything's in place as it should be.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. You and we met at a pitch competition. And
We
so
did.
how long ago? That was probably like what, 2 years ago, something like
Yeah,
that.
must be 2-3 years.
And you actually came. We're in Cleveland. You came to Cleveland. I was doing some judging and some mentoring there, and I think we had talked and connected, which I think is an interesting opportunity, because one thing we haven't really talked about with any of our other founders is the pitching process, going out and pitching your business, and whether that's trying to raise money or that's in a contest, which is what you were in.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me about that in your business. Did you do a lot of competitions and pitching, and what was that like?
Yeah, so we actually did that quite often and frequently. I mean, I was CEO, and my job was to talk about the company, build up our brand, and get people excited about us, right? That's one of the responsibilities of CEOs. And we must have, at the very early stages of the company, for the first year and a half, we bootstrapped product development through pitch competitions. We're very fortunate. We had pitch competitions in Cleveland, and a bunch of other places that we went to, and we were successful at those. And in the early stages of the company, we needed more money than we were generating in terms of revenue to, build up the product so that we could earn more capital and generate more revenue over time. So pitching was like the lifeblood of the company for a little while. We probably went through 200 to 300 different iterations of our pitch deck from the day we started the company to the day we were acquired. It never stopped. And importantly, nobody ever stopped having feedback for the pitch or for the slide deck. I think there comes a point,
good and bad, right?
Good or bad, right? And I think it's just like product design or art. Like, it's just completely subjective, right? And everybody will always have something to say about it. So I think there comes a point where you realize you want to continuously improve, but you have to be very focused in the feedback that you take in from people and make the right call. And sometimes it's just a gut call on how to tell your story.
So are there any things that over that time that you learned either about the deck or about the experience of doing pitches that, like, okay, I wish I would have known this from the beginning, or wow, this is just, one of the biggest insights that I got going through that whole process?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest insights and one of the biggest blunders that most early stage founders make, me included, was you're thinking about your business every single minute of the day, and sometimes in your dreams, right? Like, this is your baby, and just like a baby, it has emotions, it kicks, it screams, etc. But other people aren't, right? They're not as intimately familiar with your company as you are. So it's very easy when you're creating a deck or running through a presentation to get really detailed and talk about the minutia, and to overload the audience with those details, be it visually on the presentation itself or in the content of the presentation and what you're saying to them. And what I learned very quickly was, simpler is better. Like, less is very much more when it comes to giving these presentations. Images are always better than words on decks. And we started off with decks that in some cases on some slides had like lines and lines of text and paragraphs on them, and no one was reading them, right? So we learned very quickly to simplify, and we use that as a guiding theme for all of our presentations.
That's great.
Lex, so you're a developer, correct?
So I have some experience with development. I wouldn't go so far to call myself like a software engineer. I did a coding boot camp where I learned how to code in Ruby on Rails, and I think I very quickly realized that I was not made of the stuff to be a software engineer. Like, I went to business school, I went to law school. That's the stuff that I get, and it just comes naturally to me. But I thought it was important to understand how development actually happens, so that I can have meaningful conversations with product folks, so they can respect me because I appreciate the work they're doing and understand what's happening under the hood.
And that's where I was going, I guess. How has that helped you, having that experience, having some technical acumen as a founder and as a CEO? How has that helped you be successful, be effective?
Yeah, I think it's given me some credibility. in those conversations that I'm having with product folks or with engineering folks. And also I know what I'm talking about. I'm obviously, as I said, like I'm not an engineer by any stretch of the imagination. I could probably make a really basic HTML website for you if you wanted it to look like it was built in 1999. But I think that having some understanding of what's happening under the hood is really important, especially for non-technical founders, because you're basically, obviously, and you hope that you have a technical co-founder that you can trust and that relationship is good. But understanding what's happening under the hood is just a really important part of understanding your business. I've also seen a recent trend, and I've been exploring this a little bit myself, where folks are working with maybe offshore dev teams, and they don't really have any oversight as to what's happening there if they don't have a technical background. You're just basically putting trust into them, right? So really having a little bit of understanding is really beneficial.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I would totally agree. What other, as you've gone through the process in your own evolution, what kind of skills did you find valuable that you either had or needed to build throughout your process of growing the business and doing things like pitches and eventually exiting? What kind of skills were important, do you think?
Yeah, so I think in my case, I'm very much an operator. I love doing, like, give me a problem, I'll throw myself at it and figure out creative solutions to deal with it until it's solved. Like, that's how I am. And I think the shifting from operator to leader, to thinking longer term, thinking strategically in terms of beyond what happens next week, is a shift that I think most founders have a challenge with, but do have to make if their company is successful and growing, right? Because the definition of what a productive day and what work looks like for you in the driver's seat fundamentally changes. At the beginning, you're doing everything. Like, you're having meetings with clients, you're onboarding clients, you're doing sales. If you're on the technical side, you're doing development every single day. You're in the weeds of the product. That changes. And I had a lot of, I would say, friction making that shift in my case. And I think it's something that founders should be aware of as their company grows.
Yeah, and I think I've even seen it the other way, where you have these visionaries that are really forward thinking. And then at some point in the business, they do have to become more operational minded, and they struggle with that and have a lot of friction. So it's kind of interesting. Did you build a team, and what did your team look like as you grew the company? Yeah,
so we had a very interesting dynamic, I would say. So Corey and I actually started the company. We had 5 co-founders, and building a healthcare startup takes a lot of time and energy. Healthcare is a pretty slow-moving industry. We had 3 other founders drop off actually fairly early because they wanted something that was more stable. So Corey and I basically built a team from scratch between the 2 of us. And we initially started with a couple of contractors outside of North America that were helping us on the product side. And eventually we built a full team in our office. We had engineers, we had designers, we had sales folks and client success folks, and really just a cross-pollination of skill sets to do what needed to be done.
Yeah, it's great. What kind of insights did you get from, the people aspect of a business? I think that's probably been the most common topic that we've had on this show, is just, hiring the right folks and how to manage different personalities. And so what kind of, interesting aspects did you run into on the people side of the business?
Yeah, I think that, like that's like the old fashioned saying, right? Of like, leave your personal life at the door or something like that. And I think that just the modern work environment is so just naturally opposite to that, right? Like, the way that what's happening in your personal life, Andy, is going to affect your performance. It's going to affect how you're doing in the office. It's going to affect your mood. So just taking that a step further, like having a personal relationship with your team and being and having that open dialogue to understand, you know, what's going on in your life, like what's motivating you, like are you happy with how things are going, are you sad, like, and why? Going beyond just, hey, this needs to get done and it's due on Tuesday, like, can we get this out to the client? Like, that stuff's really important because you understand what's happening in the lives of your team, and you can reorient accordingly and have conversations on a deeper level that, you know, allows for the establishment of a meaningful connection beyond just, you know, hey, we work in the same office together. So I think that my thinking on that, just a more, I would say, human approach to leadership and relationships amongst team members, develop naturally over time.
How do you find that balance? I know, you know, over the years for me, I've had my business for a long time that, you know, I've always found there's a, you know, a balance, because I think at sometimes I've built like really close, deep relationships that end up, you know, sometimes being then hard to manage within the business if you become close friends with folks and are really sharing, but then you can't be too far away, like you're saying, where it's just purely about the work. And so did you ever find that is a struggle with the balance of what's the right level of kind of building close relationships and managing the personal side?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, like our team was rife with that, in good ways and maybe some challenging ones. Like Corey and I, my co-founder, we came into the business together having a pre-existing relationship, right? We weren't close friends, but we were friendly. And we had a key hire on our growth team that came into the company that did have a pre-existing friendship with Corey as well. So we were managing those dynamics basically from day one. And I think the understanding needs to be amongst everybody, right? Like there's obviously boundaries, right? Like there's moments for that playfulness and for that friendship to flourish, inside and outside of the office. But there are certain circumstances where, you know, stuff needs to get done, and there's you know, there needs to be some kind of a boundary. I would put it that way, right? Like I would talk to my friend and I would talk to Corey privately in a very different way than I would talk to him in front of the team, right? Because we have a friendship, right? You know, you nudge folks, you might call them names in a joking way, right? That's just what friends do. But the way that you conduct yourselves in front of your team is very different, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting. And just to share a story from my side of I had a client once in a software company, and he brought in the owner. There were 3 founders. He brought in the main founder brought in a good high school friend, and that person had a very challenging personality and ended up pushing out one of the founders. And then when you asked the team, they were all very afraid of this friend. And that friend would always tell people behind the scenes, you better not say anything because I've known this guy forever.
Wow.
And so it's interesting to me. You mentioned that idea of bringing in like a friend, but I think in the startup world, the interesting thing is that's sometimes where we go to first is people we know, but there can be such a challenging dynamic to that too.
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree, and I think the starting point really needs to be on values and decision making. Like, you know, since CoHealth's been acquired, I've announced that I've taken on a new role on the leadership team of a new company called Pequity, which is a Bay Area based company focusing on just really exciting stuff, but revolutionizing the way that companies compensate people. And you know, that company was started by a friend of mine that I've known for a decade and his wife. And I was a groomsman at their wedding. I was roommates with Warren in college. So there's a long history there, right? And one of the first conversations we had when we realized, you know, we want to do this together is how do we do this in a way where our friendship is put first? So we have an arrangement, an agreement where, you know, if we feel like the company is getting in the way of our friendship, then we need to figure that out, right? Like we need to put that first above all else, because we like neither of us want to walk away from this with a friendship that was thrown down the trash.
It's great.
So Before we talk a little bit more about Pequity, because I would love to hear kind of, what your role is going to be there and what you guys are doing. You're staying on as a strategic advisor to the company that acquired CoHealth?
That's right. Yeah. So I'm going to be working with them into the new year, making sure that just the transition is smooth. We had some members of our team that also transitioned over with the acquisition. So just making sure that everybody's taken care of, that the technology transfer is smooth, that the team is in a good spot, and just making sure everything's taken care of.
Awesome.
What was the exit experience like? Did they reach out to you, or did you get to a point that you decided that you wanted to move on, or how did you kind of get to that point?
Yeah, so we reached a stage in the company where there were a number of folks that we were talking with that just had expressed casual interest. I think digital health was heating up because COVID was just getting started, and I think a lot of people were orienting towards, okay, this is a real thing now. We need to think a little bit longer term, and for the short term, this is a must-have. Digital health is a must-have to improve and extend the reach of care, but COVID in many ways has also accelerated, I would think, the footprint of digital health as a staple for healthcare, right? Like I think that there are these moments in time where there's just a complete shift or a complete reset on how people think about things. And for healthcare and digital health specifically, I think COVID's one of those moments in time. So, we were having a number of conversations with a bunch of different companies, and there were a few that ended up developing quite significantly, and we felt really good about one of them, and that's why Acto's our new home.
That's great. Was it a long process and a lot of work? I think that we talked to one other founder that had gone through, in exit, and they just talked about, how much effort that it took for them to go through. What was kind of that experience like for you, as other people potentially look at, exiting for their own business?
Yeah, exiting's a full-time job, right? Like I think that the part of the reason why a lot of founders are rightfully nervous about it is because if the exit doesn't work and it falls apart, then you've likely wasted months of time that you could have been spent on building additional value for the company, be it sales or anything that you would be doing as CEO or as a founder on the exit, right? So it's basically kind of like an opportunity cost. So it's really a bit of a challenge. But in our case, we were very fortunate. We were dealing with some really just nice and transparent guys on the other side of the aisle on Acto's leadership team. And it was, the process took a number of months, but it was a fairly smooth one, thankfully. And, I would say for founders that are thinking about this or that are currently having those conversations, there's typically a few levers of value that any acquiring company wants to look at, that they're basically pulling on when it comes to determining, what the terms of the deal are and whether or not they want to acquire you to begin with, right? So the first is your tech, right? Like, is there something proprietary? Is there something unique there? Is there something that's going to accelerate the roadmap of the company that may be acquiring you, right? And how far ahead does that put them, and how much value does that in and of itself add to them in their roadmap? The second is the team. Is the team necessary? Does the team add value? Is the team required to allow for that acceleration of the roadmap, right? Are you looking at an acquisition, acqui-hire situation where the team comes on board and works with them? Who goes and who doesn't? Does everybody go? Those are some of the questions that quite frequently come up. And then the third thing, which is kind of a subset, I would say, of team but a little bit different, is leadership, right? Because in some cases, they just want the team, they want the tech, and there isn't really an opportunity for the leadership team to transfer over because it'll be a little bit redundant. And in some cases there is, or in some cases there's a bit of a middle ground where there's like a transition period and maybe you're supporting with consulting. Those are the three different levers that I would say most folks pull on.
Now, I think it's really interesting you mentioned the opportunity cost. And the fact that if you're going to go down that route, whether it's with one company or multiple, there's a lot of time that could go into growing the business. Any thoughts for folks that, maybe getting because I even know in my business, I've had people reach out and say, are you looking at selling? How do you maybe make that decision, or what are the things you might want to look at to decide if it's even worth that time versus trying to grow the business and keep moving on? And I'm sure a lot of it's a personal decision, but I'm kind of curious from your standpoint.
Yeah, so I would say assessing seriousness is your number one priority, like in the first couple of conversations, right? Like your objective is to basically, as the founder, is to balance continuous value add to the company that you're currently working on, and dedicating as little time to the exit and the acquisition as you can. And one of the ways to kind of balance that out is just really assessing how serious this buyer is, right? Like if they're just following up and you're just having a lot of conversations and it really isn't going anywhere, they're just talking, then chances are they're not really serious and they're just kicking tires. NDAs, diving into data rooms, talking to your clients, talking to the team. Those are all indicators that, they're moving forward and they're taking additional steps to dive a little bit deeper into the guts of the company. And those would be positive indicators.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think, I also find it interesting, the dynamics of how that can even impact the team if folks are coming in and doing that due diligence. I've heard in other companies that, when gets around that the company's looking at being, sold, and how does that impact your employees and their thinking, or if someone is digging into a certain department, and so was there anything in your company that you had to manage from that perspective of the other people when it came to that process of evaluating the exit?
Yeah, so I mean, and I know of founders that have taken very different approaches to this. Some founders do not share any acquisition discussions with their team until it's rock solid and firm. And some take a very different approach. So I did not do that. I wanted to be very open and transparent with the team. And as soon as we started having some of these conversations that progressed past the point of, just kicking tires, basically, we said to the team, look, we're having these discussions. We don't know how they're going to end up. We're going to require you guys to sit in on some of these meetings because they're going to want to talk to your technical team. If you're a SaaS founder, they're going to want to dive under the hood into the product. Right. They're going to want to talk to the people that built it. And in my personal opinion, just being transparent with the team so that they understand the context is a part of the process. You want everybody to be aligned and you want everybody to be, cheering this on and hoping for its success. So that's what we did. So there were no surprises.
How was that received by the team when you shared the news?
I think it was positive, right? I mean, in our case, right, everybody reacted in a way where I think they felt like, oh, wow, somebody sees a lot of value in what we've built. We obviously have seen this value before because we've been spending a lot of time, energy, and money to get to this point. So having that external validation beyond, the clients that we were working with and that somebody wants to purchase the company, I think was a really nice feeling.
I'm curious about you mentioned the 3 levers and you talked about leadership and sometimes that's valuable or not. Most of the exits that I've talked to folks, they usually want, an earnout or some period of time where the founder or founders move over. Did you consciously go into the process saying, look, I want to move on to something else? Or, was it more driven by them to say, look, we're interested in the tech and the people, and this is how we want the deal? How did that kind of play out?
Yeah, I think that there were a few different ways that things could have played out in terms of my involvement and potentially Corey's involvement as well. The way that it ended, I think, was for the best. When I was going into those conversations, I was very transparent with everybody, including the co-founders and friends that I'm currently working with on Pequity, that, CoHealth and bringing that chapter to a successful conclusion as a result of the exit is my number one priority, right? You have an established team, you have people that are relying on you, you have investors that are relying on you. That comes first and foremost, right? You can't, what's the saying? The captain is the last one off the ship, right? So that's really kind of the mentality that I embraced in the circumstances that we were dealing with. And once that was kind of buttoned up and the next steps were very clear, my involvement with the acquisition in terms of next steps was clear, only then did we go public with the announcement of my involvement with Pequity and my next steps, and only then did I feel comfortable committing on a full-time basis to that as my next journey.
I'm curious, before we want to hear kind of about your transition and where you're going, but, continuing to look at your current company, where do you see that industry going and kind of software within the health space? Since you've been so ingrained in it for a couple of years now, what did you see and what do you see happening?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, the data speaks for itself. So health consumers, which is all of us, we all have some kind of interaction with the healthcare system, whether it's our doctor or clinic or our hospital, want digital health tools to make more informed decisions. The data is very clear. Over 90% of consumers want that, and they want it for different reasons, but they want to make more informed decisions when it comes to A, their understanding of any health situations that they're dealing with, and B, they want to be proactive in their health. If there's tools they can use to more effectively manage, perhaps a chronic condition, or perhaps care of a loved one, right? They want access to those things now more than ever, given the circumstances of the world that we live in. So I think we're going to be seeing a lot more patient centricity, number one, and I think that COVID has accelerated that in many ways. A lot of slow moving multinational companies in the health space that kind of had some distant vision for digital health and for patient or consumer facing software have really accelerated the timelines on that, given what's happening with COVID, because everybody, I think, is on the same page now that we need to expand our footprint in the digital health space. So there's been a flurry of acquisitions in digital health since, early this year, in large part because of that. And I think that's the market signaling to the world, this is going to become a more meaningful part of the healthcare experience moving forward.
Yeah, it's awesome. I, one of the other insights that I have about your space from clients and even that pitch competition that I had been part of was, selling into healthcare and selling into hospitals. It's a little bit different than selling sometimes into other businesses or selling into the consumer market. I'm just kind of curious for those folks that maybe are looking at a business or a software or solution for the healthcare market. What was that experience like? What maybe is different, and what insights might you have about that?
It's slow going. So let me take a step back, right? So I was a founder with no real background in the healthcare space aside from being a patient. I didn't have a lot of connections in healthcare. I didn't know about, healthcare in terms of clinical workflows, in terms of the day-to-day of life in a hospital. I really didn't know any of that stuff. So for me, it was doubly difficult, right? You see a lot of healthcare companies started by doctors that might have an in with a hospital. They can pilot there and stuff like that. So that was a challenge for me and for my co-founder, because those relationships just didn't exist. I would say in healthcare, you really kind of have to wiggle your way in. Some hospitals these days, like really innovative ones, might have innovation centers, might have even accelerators or incubators for startups where, they can join those and they might be able to find a pilot site or an implementation ward or a unit through those. But most hospitals, most health systems don't have setups like that. And what you need to do as a founder is find a champion. And what that means is basically finding somebody in a unit or in a health system that's really excited about what you're doing, that can maybe pilot in their own unit. Maybe they can connect you with folks where you can get a pilot going. Because what you're trying to do as a health founder is get as much data as you can to show that there's a return here. And that could mean different things. That could be maybe a financial return. It could be, an improvement in patient experience. It could be clinical efficiency. What it means isn't important, but what you need is data. You need case studies. And that's your number one selling tool in the health space.
What were the different roles that you ended up having to deal with? Did you have to deal with, physicians and healthcare providers, as well as IT and unit, business folks, or just what kind of roles, and how did that impact the approach that you took?
Yeah, so I mean, we and I specifically interacted with everybody, from nurses and physicians on the front line to boards and CEOs and CFOs. We kind of took a top-down, bottom-up approach where, we would want to speak to folks higher up in the hospital on the administrative side because we'd like to get their buy-in. But it's very important to acknowledge that even if you have buy-in from senior leadership, if the clinical frontline staff aren't buying what you're trying to implement, doesn't matter, because you're not going to succeed. They're the ones that ultimately either use the tool or solution or deliver the tool or solution. And if you have a messy implementation process, despite the CEO and the board saying this is great, you're going to fail. So we went bottom up while going top down, really focusing on implementation, really focusing on client success, making sure that the process from going without CoHealth to CoHealth was as seamless as it could have been. And that means doing things in many cases that don't really scale, but are necessary to get your footprint in the door with a health system. I just want to say one thing about IT, Andy, because I think it's important. I love my IT folks, but I think in the healthcare context for founders, they're definitely a bit of a blocker. So what I mean by that is, you go to a large health system, they have an IT team typically, and they think that they can typically build everything. They can do it themselves, or this is on the roadmap, or this is a part of their electronic medical record integration roadmap, stuff like that. And we tried to do everything that we could to stay as clear from IT as possible. We wanted nothing to do with them. We wanted to focus all of our efforts on the clinical side, on the administrative teams, to basically show them this is good for patients. Because our experience with IT was that they just raise more problems typically. No offense to any IT people watching this.
No, and yeah, you probably have a few, but it's funny you say that. I think in most industries that I found IT, I do think part of their role in a lot of cases is to be that, gate to how is this going to work with security? How is it going to work with our other platforms? So it's funny that you say that I think that in many of the customers we deal with, it is IT that ends up being a, difficult influencer in the process. For sure.
Yeah. And look, there need to be checks and balances when you're dealing in high risk industries like healthcare or banking, right? They want to make sure that you're implementing something that's going to be good for the system and good for their patients and not damage anything. Like, it makes sense. But you just have to be very careful that you can get looped into conversations and just privacy impact assessments that take 6, 12, 18 months and no revenue. So when you're an early stage company or you're a SaaS founder, you need to make sure that you're pursuing revenue as quickly as possible and having conversations with the people that can unlock that value for you.
Out of curiosity too, in this front of talking about like customers, what were your biggest challenges or barriers to finding the first customers that would take on your product?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge was ourselves. Like, I think it was imposter syndrome a little bit, seriously. Like, we were pitching our first hospitals with a product that didn't exist. So we were selling them on basically mock-ups and screenshots of a product that was in development that we couldn't demo yet. So we would say, hey, we're going to be planning for an implementation in a couple months. They would buy in, we would get an invoice or send in an invoice. We'd close our first couple clients. And they would think that we were prepping for implementation, but really we were scrambling to just get the product ready. So getting over that imposter syndrome where we were basically saying to ourselves, is this okay? Like, are we doing the right thing? Is this fine? Is this normal? I think that was a really big challenge in our own minds to get over.
It's funny you say that. I over the years, I have met a lot of software companies that have done that, and I know a really large software business that we consult with, and, they'll kind of create fake features with mock-ups, take those out to their clients and kind of pitch them as a new feature that they have, and then once the clients want them, it's scramble to try and actually make it work. So it's interesting that you say that, because I've seen that many times. And that's really the validation process, right? Whether you're early in a product or you're later stage and you're talking about new features, that's just validating ideas.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I mean, there's nothing better than knowing somebody's going to pay for something and is committed to paying for it before you build it, right? Like, that demonstrates a clear conviction in the value of the product and a clear commitment on the client side that you're going to have capital coming in exchange for building this out. So it's something that I know some founders do, but when I was doing it for the first time, it was very nerve-wracking.
So just shifting gears a little bit, tell us about Pequity and your role there. I'm curious to hear what the company is all about. It sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah. So Pequity was founded in January of this year by Warren Leibovich and Caitlin Knopp. So Warren is a longtime friend of mine. We've been working together for 10 years, or we've known each other rather for 10 years. We were roommates together in college. We did a couple fun side projects together. We were building like a web app for his mom, who's an author of a children's novel, some children's books. So we've just done some fun stuff like that. We've been friends literally forever. And he and his wife, Caitlin, started this company because Caitlin has about 10 years of experience in the compensation sector, leading compensation teams at Google and Instacart and Cruise and a bunch of other amazing companies. And what she was realizing was that all these compensation teams were running the comp process out of spreadsheets. So they were basically looking at market data that they were getting that in many cases, is either inaccurate or out of date. They're building compensation bands for their companies where they're basically saying, okay, how much do we pay this person in this geography at this level of experience? And that process basically has to be done every single year because there's new data or data is out of date. And it takes a lot of time, takes a lot of money. So what Caitlin realized was that there must be a better way. And Warren comes from a product background, having led product and design teams at companies like LinkedIn and Sony. So she basically went to the living room and said to her husband, hey, we should do this. And starting in January earlier this year, I was still working on CoHealth. I was doing some part-time, advisory work with them as friends, just helping out. And realized that I really like working with them. And as things came to a conclusion with CoHealth and we, had the company acquired, we started having some conversations about actually doing this together full time. So we this week actually announced that I'm going to be joining the leadership team full time as head of ops and legal, and helping Caitlin and Warren turn Pequity into a powerhouse. I'm really excited about it.
That's awesome. Very exciting. Congrats.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really, really fun to be working with longtime friends. It's not something that most people get to do often, so I'm really excited about it.
Are you how do you feel about the transition emotionally of going from something, and again, and I'm kind of asking in the context of most founders I know, their products become their babies and their, the companies become their babies. So emotionally, that leaving of CoHealth, going to something new that can feel like a new relationship, a new baby. But tell me how your emotion has been through kind of the last couple weeks to now and going forward.
Yeah. So, I mean, Pequity was my baby. Like, let's be clear. Like, I basically treated it like a child.
CoHealth.
CoHealth, yeah. Like I said,
you're already switching mentally. Yeah.
Like it was, right? And like I said, it has the same needs as a baby. Like, it needs to be fed. It needs revenue, right? It has emotions. It kicks and screams. Maybe a client's having an issue. Like, it has all those things that just raising a normal kid has. So, despite the end result being something that I think, I was satisfied with, it was a bit emotional for me. It was emotional. And if you ask like my co-founder, Corey, or any of our investors, I think that they would say the same thing. Like, it was an emotional experience for me. But coming on to Pequity with Warren and Caitlin, I joining the leadership team with them as friends of mine. It really feels like this is also my baby. Was I there from the very beginning with them? Yes, right. They're the founders. They're the two founders, and they're in the driver's seat, and I'm there to help them and make sure that this succeeds. But I still have that same level of emotional attachment to this because I've joined from such an early stage.
Yeah, it's great. What has you most excited about this next chapter with them?
I mean, I've already said that working with friends is great. Like, I love it. They're just great people. So I'm really excited about that. But, we've been at this for less than a year. And some of the folks that have already signed on to use this tool are really, really awesome people and awesome companies. Like, Instacart, which we're really excited about, is one of our first clients. And, we, through Caitlin's experience in the compensation field, we know that there's a huge need for this across all of compensation, and using this as an opportunity to get our feet wet in the comp and HR sector is something that we're really excited about. We have a lot of really exciting features coming down the pipeline that's going to add a lot of value to HR and compensation teams at scale. And with Caitlin at the helm of this, given her experience in the field, we really have clear line of sight into what we need to do to scale this thing into a behemoth. And we're really excited about it.
That's cool. Since you've been in the startup space before, is there one thing that you're kind of walking in the door saying, like, I want to do this differently, or I want the company to do this differently than what I did at CoHealth?
100%. Yeah, I would say the biggest thing that's top of mind for me is thinking about yourself as a startup. So I think that a lot of founders, me included, because I did this at CoHealth, they call themselves a startup. And by identifying as a startup and referring to yourself as a startup in your own mind, and also just when you're talking to your team internally, I think it kind of acts as kind of a cop-out in some ways, because by calling yourself a startup, you're basically saying, oh, well, it's okay that we don't have that process defined yet, or, we're really early stage, or it basically portrays this image like you're not a real company yet. And I think by not treating yourself with the same, I don't know if seriousness is the right word, but the same level of seriousness that, a larger company would, you're not being as effective as you could be, because you're basically giving yourself a cop-out to, not put in the extra effort, or to not define that process because you're a startup. So since I joined Pequity from day one, Warren and Caitlin and I have talked about this a lot. We think of ourselves as a company, right? We don't refer to ourselves, at least in our own internal meetings, as a startup, because that tells our team that, it's okay if we screw up, or it's okay if this feature isn't in the best state for a client or something like that. Not that that happens, but we want to make sure that we're operating at like 100% full steam every single day. And there isn't room, for us to be at 99%. And I think that by not identifying as a startup, you kind of engender that level of credibility and seriousness where everybody starts realizing, okay, like, this is a real thing. We got to start taking this seriously. So that mentality shift is something I've definitely brought with me from CoHealth to Pequity.
I find that such an intriguing insight.
It's important. I learned it the hard way, I think, in some ways, but it's an important shift in mentality.
So how do you get over that barrier in a startup in some ways? Because there are a lot of things that still need figured out. There are, long to-do lists. And yeah, I totally agree. I think that that's so interesting, of that being an easy cop-out to say, well, this isn't done because of X.
Yeah.
But how do you balance that? Because in most startups that I know, on the other side, though, there's a long to-do list and you have to prioritize. You can't have everything, and you can't have everything done. So where do you, having that insight going in your new business and your new role, how do you think you can find that balance? Because it's never going to be perfect.
Yeah, I think it really just comes down to ruthless prioritization, right? Like most companies, especially earlier stage startups, they want to say yes to every opportunity because it's exciting and it's money and it's great and money's great, and that gives the company lifeblood to make it to the next month. But that can result in death by 1,000 cuts, right? If your product's being pulled in 50 different directions because you've said yes to so many different opportunities, that can kill you, right? And there were many alluring opportunities for me and for my co-founder, Corey, where there was money that was put in front of us or money that was dangled in front of us by a potential client or a prospect. And, we wanted to chase it, but we didn't because it wasn't on path with our roadmap and our vision. And I think that level of ruthless prioritization from the standpoint of a founder is just 100% needed to get the company, from the ground to the next step.
I'm totally going to steal the ruthless prioritization term. I like that a lot. I don't know if you heard that somewhere, if you made it up, but that's a good one. I like that. That the way it's said.
Yeah, and I just think it's really important because it's very easy to want to do everything. I used to say to Corey, right? Like he was the complete optimist, always 100% positive. I'm more on the cynical side. So I would say to him, it's the most important thing that we can say is no, because saying no is harder. But more often than not, it allows us to focus on our core competencies and do what we need to do.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. When we work with clients, we do things like looking at retention of users and roadmap and stuff like that. And just even simply putting like a number to what's the impact to our customer base? What's the impact to other things that we're doing? What's the cost? What's the time that it's going to take? And even if you rank those from 1 to 10 as you're going through, it gives you some level of prioritization to it.
For sure.
So I've personally liked bringing like a logical process to trying to rank different things that can help get you to that, at least a limited list.
Yeah, a framework that I've used is basically identical to what you just said, Andy. So ranking in terms of complexity, in terms of cost, and in terms of value add, right? Like, and just measuring, just using simple numbers, right? Like, if this is going to be a high impact, high yield investment, then maybe it's worth doing, right? If it's a high yield, high impact investment that takes very limited time, capital, and energy to do, then it's a no brainer. But mapping that out with your team, right, and understanding from a product standpoint what those easy wins, low hanging fruit are, can really make a big difference.
Yeah, we've always positioned in, is this from a value impact standpoint, 1 time, 2 time, 10 time. If you're doing something that's going to make a 10 times difference in your business, you really want to look at those as a high priority.
Yeah, and getting feedback from your clients like continuously, right? Like if you factor that in and you say, "Hey, will you pay for this?" "Oh, really interesting. Like let's talk about how this adds value for you." Right? That can help you better understand how big of an opportunity you're dealing with in terms of your roadmap.
That's great.
Awesome.
Well, I have one last question. Are Canadians funnier?
Are we funnier? I would say I would think so. I mean, we have Drake. And he's pretty funny.
Yeah.
If you watch him on Instagram, he's good.
That's what I always hear. So just wanted to find out.
I mean, like, we're pretty funny people generally, I would say, but on the hockey rink. I think we're a little bit more serious when it comes to putting on the skates and throwing down gloves.
I actually have been up to Toronto playing hockey before because I played all through high school and college, and so
nice.
That's the only time I actually have been up there. So the only thing I know in Toronto is like an ice rink. That's pretty much the only thing that I've had exposure to.
Well, when you can, you should definitely come back. It's a great city. I love Toronto. It's a good home.
It's awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Zach. This has been fantastic. We appreciate taking the time. For everybody that's watching, stay tuned and see what Zach is up to with Pequity. Take a look at CoHealth and see where that company continues to go. And again, thanks again, Zach. We appreciate your time, and we will see everybody next time.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Zach.
Bye-bye.